All right, so now let's start to talk about this actual case study, which, as I've indicated, has to do with jaguars. And some of you may not know that there are actually a handful of jaguars in the United States that are free roaming. And they occur along the US-Mexico border, with Arizona, New Mexico, where those meet Mexico, right? And so what we're going to focus on today are some issues related to the fragmentation of the habitats used by this one jaguar population called the northern jaguar population that spans the US-Mexico border. And one component of that problem is what you see here, which are sections of wall or fencing that are built along the border. Okay, so this is a type of wall that's meant to obviously keep out cars, but also keep out pedestrians as well. And as you can imagine, something like this is also going to be restrictive to the movements of wildlife. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this northern jaguar population that spans the US-Mexico border. The dotted line here shows the historical range of this population. As you can see, it kind of was not found in central Mexico, but spanned the coastlines of both western and eastern Mexico. And so the section we're talking about with the northern jaguar population it shows that much of it is up through the state of Sonora in Mexico and extends over the border into, which is right here. You can see where the US starts there. And it's really the main areas, which are the lower box that has the, where it says Sky Islands there, but potentially even further up north into the Mogollon Rim. These are areas that there's been sightings of jaguars, right, in recent decades. And so they know that the animals are there. Are they permanent residents, or do they need to move along the border? That's not as well known because jaguars are very elusive creatures. But overall, there are jaguars that spend at least some of their time in the US, in extreme southern Arizona and New Mexico. Okay, so where it's showing the black here, this is essentially the Sonora, and this is the northern jaguar population, the main body of where you find the animals in this population. But this is the same population that extends up into the US. So let's take a little bit closer look at this. This is that same range of that northern jaguar population. They call it here the borderlands jaguar population. And where it is spanning the two countries, okay? Again, as we just saw, the historical range is much larger, but this is considered to be the current range. So prior to 1996, there had been no sightings of jaguars in the US. And then in that year, there were 2 male jaguars that were photographed in Arizona and New Mexico, okay? So this indicated that they were there. And if they're in the United States, then they fall under the purview of the US Fish and Wildlife Service as species that require management, okay? So again, prior to the early 1990s, well, in the early 1990s, they thought that the jaguars had been eliminated from the US due to hunting long ago, you know, but these 2 photographs of 2 different males in 1996 really changed the situation, right? And meant that the US had to start to look into this because they were on their territory. So they have to be then, they're the responsibility of the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay, so here are those 2 males. This is Macho B. As you can see, Macho B was eventually captured and collared so they could get movement patterns on him. And the other is El Jefe. I don't know if you'll hear the sound. This doesn't really matter, but it's all written down. But beautiful animal. So those are the two jaguars that pretty much started it all. But 1996, quite a long time ago. There has been sustained work since then to better understand the size of the entire northern jaguar population, as well as how many animals there are generally moving around in the U.S. area, right? So we do know a few things in terms of their ecology. In the U.S., more generally in this northern jaguar population, they're really living in rugged mountains, foothills, and ridges. So what we call like upland habitat. Okay, um, and these are isolated patches naturally because they're living in these upland areas that are mountainous. And this region has multiple, mountainous areas, but they are separated by lowlands, right? So there's sort of a natural um, matrix in which the animals are living in these upland patches that are separated by lowlands. There are corridors that connecting these primary habitats, but we don't understand that much, like about their role, right? These are mostly upland habitats that they can move between without going deep into the lowlands, right? So essentially, there's sort of the mountainous areas, which are considered uplands, and then there's lower non-mountainous areas that are still kind of uplands, and then there's lowlands, right? So these corridors tend to be these uplands. But they might also use riparian or river-dominated areas within the lowlands as well. So there is potentially some natural connections between these mountainous habitats. Okay, so in Arizona and New Mexico, the things that they're most likely eating are deer and javelina. I mean, the list of prey taken by jaguars includes more than 85 species. Um, uh, but really, javelina and deer are probably the dietary mainstays here that are going to keep these animals in food in the area, and these are abundant in this region. Okay, so this is a quote from the Arizona Game Fish Department talking about these jaguars. Okay, again, prior to 1996, they didn't have to think about jaguars because it was assumed that they had been regionally extinct from the U.S. But Macho B and El Jefe showed that was not the case, and so this was after an assessment of their habitat and their connectivity to the Sonora population. They concluded that for jaguars to thrive or even to persist in Arizona, a few modest needs must be met. They must be protected from being killed. They must have an adequate prey base, and they must have movement corridors to connect with source populations in northern Mexico. And so you're going to talk about this in your group. That's one component of where we're thinking about corridors and connectivities between US and Mexico. Just to give you an idea of what the preferred habitats this is like a suitability, habitat suitability map, where the red areas are the really suitable areas for jaguars. The lower panels are blow-ups of this area along the Arizona-New Mexico border. And then the left larger picture here is the western area that's really of importance, and then the eastern areas on the right. Okay, and so what you can see is that there are a fair number of areas in this region that are valuable to the jaguars in terms of habitat suitability, but they're generally not perfectly connected either. Okay. And there's actually, this is just part of it. There's some that are further north. And as you'll talk about in your groups, I want you to note that this is Interstate 10. And if you've never been out to this part of the country, Interstate 10 is pretty much the major interstate traffic corridor through this region. It's a large multi-lane interstate, just like I-29 or I-94, right? And there are areas that are also suitable habitat for jaguars in which they occupy that are north of this as well. So you're also going to think about connectivity of these natural habitat patches within Arizona and New Mexico.